And welcome back to the Young Dad Podcast. Whether you're outside grilling, mowing the lawn, changing dirty diapers, or maybe just maybe you got a moment to sit back, relax, and listen to your favorite podcast, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, whatever you're cooking. Thanks for being here and thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Jay, and today I'm joined by a friend of mine, Mike, founder of Curevine, which is his private practice focused on mental health and recovery treatment for individuals and families. And Mike has one heck of a story and brings a ton to the table for the listeners today. So I hope you're ready. Buckle up, and it's going to be a really good one today from his experience of being a new girl dad. He just welcomed a baby daughter not very recently, and also brings a powerful story of recovery as well as navigating fatherhood across state lines, a situation that some of you may be in, and something that we haven't actually talked about before here on the podcast, because it's just something that I don't run into a lot of people that actually talk about it or are open to talking about that situation. So really glad to have Mike today. So listeners, make sure you grab your juice box, grab a snack, and let's jump in and welcome Mike to the show. Mike, welcome.
Thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it. I'm glad we've had are having the chance to actually connect in this way now. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. No, I've been looking forward to it. I'm glad to be able to talk to you and hear a little bit more about your story and talk fatherhood with you as well as recovery. I think those are two really important things for the audience to hear. I have a pretty strong audience in both those domains, I would think. So
Seems like that.
we're yeah. No, I love the recovery space. I think we'll start there. I really love the recovery space, especially the community over on Instagram. It's just supportive, It's just supportive. It's real. It's really authentic, more so than other like support systems, because it's all people who have been through it in some aspect, way, shape, or form, whether they've been related to someone who went through recovery treatment or whether they are the person that went through the recovery. It's real life stuff, man. Like you can talk to someone in support groups and things like that. And when it comes to the actual real life stuff, like recovery, addiction, things like that, there's not a lot, you can relate best if you've been through it on one of the sides of it. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to agree.
that's my thoughts here.
No, I'm inclined to agree with you. I don't, obviously there are therapists and other mental health workers in this space who haven't necessarily gone through addiction directly, but there's usually it's been proximate in their life in some way. So like, I never want to discredit someone's ability, but to treat around addiction and recovery. But I do also recognize that a lot of my clients, one of the reasons that they choose to work with me is because I have gone through with myself, and boy,
Well,
have I gone through it. I've done a
yeah,
lot.
it's one of those things that's like, once if you can find someone that actually has been through it, that's why it's like, if you're looking for like a life coach or something. And I know this may sound like I'm trashing on this demographic of coaches and whatnot, quote unquote coaches. I have my thoughts on quote unquote coaches, but when there's a woman who's a coach for men, like that doesn't really always add up. Like a woman that's a life coach for men. It's like you don't get it. You don't get what it's like to be a man, kind of thing. Or vice versa. Like a man who's a coach for women. Like it doesn't really work out that way. And plus I have many other thoughts about coaches in general, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. But it's important to get to
Yeah,
know someone who's been through it and to understand, like, hey, you've been through it, I'm going through it, so you get me at a different level than that other person's gonna get me. I'm one of those personally, like, when it comes to recovery space, that's been a proxy of the addiction. My biological mother was an addict, is an addict. I don't know where she's at. I haven't talked to her in like 15 years, but I went to Alateen and things like that growing up, and it was really fun. I really enjoyed Alateen. Alateen's awesome.
well, that's
um
so cool.
I think it's a great program. I think more teens, that's one of the ones I fully support and stuff. So I've kind of been a proxy, never gone through it myself, but been a proxy of it and seen the effects of it on myself and families and things like that. So, but regardless, Mike, tell us a little bit about your journey here, because there's three parts to your journey here that I want to talk about. I want to talk about your fatherhood journey when it started. I know that when your son was born and him growing up and your recovery go pretty closely hand in hand, right? Or they're
Absolutely.
on a similar path. And then
The
all
timeline's
that
very
has
much
led you
over.
to today with your wife and your baby girl.
Yeah, those timelines very much overlap in terms of when I consider my actual recovery. But I was kind of looking forward for you to go like on a rant about coaches. Can we get that at some point, maybe?
Yeah, I can give you my coach's rant. I can give you my coach's rant. So you and I, we're both professionals in mental health, right? We both went to. I mean, you have more licensures, things like that, than I do. I have, my degrees, things like that, my experience and whatnot. But we both work in this field as professionals, right?
Sure. Yep.
But then you get to a coach. I feel like most coaches are a my size fits all approach.
Mm.
And so they have not a one size fits all, but it's a my size fits
Size.
everyone else's approach. And so not to say they're like full of it, but they're very like narrow sighted, and they're very like I said, like I'm saying here, my side fits all approach. And they beyond that, they don't really know what they're talking about. They don't have a lot to offer. They don't have a lot to bring to the table. They're like, here's my approach, here's my size fits all. If it doesn't work for you, then you're the problem, not me, kind of thing,
Yeah, that's
not realizing it's the other way around. So that's how I feel about most coaches.
yeah. I think it just in general in life, if you're bringing that kind, it's kind of like a megalomania aspect to it. Really, if you're applying, oh, this worked for me, so it will work for you. Are there coaches for whom like their scope is this is what worked for me, so this is what I know. Maybe it will work for you. I think that's like a better attitude. Where we run into the problem is like you said, if it doesn't work, you're the problem. That's the fallacy. So that's where we run into a conflict, in my opinion, because obviously it really goes against basically everything I believe in, and it sounds like you as well, to try and apply just what worked for you to anyone else. Certainly influences my work for sure. Just like we talked about in the beginning, having gone through experiences directly, it would be a shame if that didn't show up in my work in some ways. But I never have the expectation that this cookie cutter way is the only way by any means. Really, just the opposite of how I feel, frankly. I don't know if you mentioned this about my background, and it might not be super prevalent like on my Instagram, which I'm not. This is the first social media I've ever had, which is crazy. I know because Facebook came out while I was in college, but I just never wanted to really participate in that way. It became what I recognized as a necessity when I started the private practice. And I'm so glad I did. Let me say that too, because there were assumptions, that I made about social media where I was off base. And I feel ignorant in retrospect, not recognizing that it's just like any other tool, it's how you use it. And you can use it in a way that is unhealthy for you. You can use it in a way that people can use it in a way that I find frankly annoying, or you can use it to, for your own purposes, which for me is uh, well, primarily to connect with other people and provide some education, some resources to put out there for people to think about that are interested, and also to give like a little bit of a picture of my life, simply because one of the questions I get so often in messages, like especially on other platforms, are it's like something to the effect of, how are you happy? How do you life? How are you doing this? How are you not bored out of your mind? Things like that. So I like to show a little bit of enough of my life, A, because I don't mind it. I'm an open book, and I revel in that. And B, because I like to show people that, an example of what it looks like to be really happy and feel very fulfilled within a life without drugs.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, you're on your Instagram. I don't know if I mentioned, but you have a few three-letter acronyms behind your name that I hadn't mentioned. CIP, FAS, ARC, FMC. And I love what you're saying here about social media as well. How it's a tool. It can be used as a tool, right, for connection. And that's how all social medias are. Instagram, X, Facebook, you name it, it can be used that way. It's about how you use it,
I did
and
not
what you're
realize
using it for.
somehow that eluded me. I don't know how. Like you, I've quickly found that myself plugged into a community of people who were very obviously passionate and authentic about their own experiences and, the issues on which they were working. And I just didn't anticipate it having that kind of utility. I didn't think I'd be sitting down talking to someone, like you, where you're not in the recovery field, exactly or directly, but you're very much, with your podcast guests and everything, very much cover a slice of life that overlaps with a lot of my own work. And my point is, I really just didn't have the expectation to make those kind of connections, to collaborate with people on even like curriculum based stuff that I use with clients. So that it's been such a pleasure and a surprise to me. I'm sure you've heard the phrase that connection is, the opposite of addiction is connection. There's TED Talks and stuff and articles, some of which I've written based around that as a model. And I am a big believer in that connection is super important for me personally. It's one of my absolute biggest priority values, top tier values. So it's been a surprise to me, and I'm really, really grateful that I did take that opportunity to do something I didn't necessarily really want to, which is engage in that sphere. and that I've really benefited from because I've met some awesome, awesome people.
No, it's great. Absolutely. I can agree with everything you said here because the people I've met, people I've talked to, people I've connected with just through the podcast and being able to have a platform like this, even though it may be small, may not get as many views as I hoped and dreamed of many years ago when I first started it. It's really cool to see just the power of connection and how that's kind of been the overarching theme of Young Dad Podcast, right? Is connection over like perfection. Like these episodes aren't perfect. I don't have one of those deep, sultry, delicious radio voices or anything like that. I have a speech impediment, things like that. Trust me, people on YouTube like to call that out all the time. It's fine. And it's just about the connection. Like I've connected people. I've connected a bunch of people, to new people, to new resources, to new ideas, to new thoughts, to just new things and to new stories and to new people that they can relate to and yeah, they can find some solace in and things like that. So it's really cool. And like you're saying here, when it comes to recovery, it's about connection, right? It's the opposite because you have to have people who care about you. You have to find things that you connect to as an individual. Like one of your story highlights on your Instagram, and I think this is a great thing to talk about here is one of your story highlights is sober hobbies, right? Because those
Yeah.
are the things that you found that you connect to through
Hmm.
the recovery, right? And then for me, like that was for me growing up, I'm realizing it now, but for me, that connection was to sports, right? That got me through. Like the connection to sports got me through life pretty much
Yeah.
and
Likewise.
got me through my childhood and into adulthood and has really continued that connection to where I connect with people all the time just through sports. But that keeps me going. And I found other ways to connect with people now as well. But between church, between sports and Jesus, I think those two things really are my main connectors to myself, to staying healthy, to staying grounded, to staying focused. At least it was growing up. Obviously it's changed over time, but that's the gist of it
Should
there.
have.
So
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think you mentioned this in my intro, but we've talked about it just through chat. Obviously, my background, the majority of my professional life, I spent as a football coach. Football was my identity for the vast majority of my life. I'm 40 now. I got into recovery around 32. I've been clean for seven years. But prior to that, football was it really became my identity when it became my profession, which was right out of college. My first job was I'm from Baltimore and knew that I always wanted to work in football. And my toward the end of your senior year, and you're scrambling to find that internship or job or what the hell am I going to do with this, undergrad degree, that I just spent 4 years on. And I had two opportunities. One was with the Texans in Houston, and the other one was with the Ravens. So obviously,
you picked the Texans.
I picked the Ravens, being from Baltimore, and that was not an insignificant choice in terms of the way it affected my story in many ways because it put me back in the environment in which I grew up generally, and yeah, people are, like in every town with a football team, people are nuts about it and nuts about that team. From a very young age, I felt a lot of expectation to make it, that I was going to be the one to do this and do that. And that was like that first little bit of validation, um, that others really echoed for me and that I really absorbed because it felt like positive validation. And not for a second at the time did I think there was anything negative about that. Um, about, coming back after a game and, oh my gosh, they had you on TV so much during this game. We saw you next to Coach whomever, Harbaugh, and like all the time, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm not gonna lie, as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old, that was really cool for me. And for
Felt
my
pretty
friends,
good.
if it was, they thought it was I mean, awesome. We had won only one Super Bowl at that point, but still, the Ravens are huge, and that's a huge football town. So everybody was just so excited by that it almost became like all people saw about me. The only thing that anyone really wanted to talk or ask about was about like, well, let me hear what so and so's like. What's Ray Lewis like? What's things like that. And that's why when I say identity, I don't even necessarily mean just my own personal sense of identity. I mean the sense of identity that I think when we are less mature can feel like it's ascribed from other people, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. It's like we want to have a perception of ourselves, but then the perception of ourselves can get quickly altered by how others are seeing us because that's what essentially is like feeding those like dopamine hits, right? And then that kind of takes over and it's like, "Oh, well that's who I am now." Obviously, I'm just the football guy to everybody. That's like where my value is coming from, especially
My
as a man. You're
100%.
going to feed into those things to where what gives you value.
Yeah, I mean, you're so spot on. That is so spot on. When you talk about, I mean, neurologically, in terms of like the dopaminergic reward system, like very much engaged, right, with that rather directly. And yeah, it becomes very easy when those things feel good. I have a feeling we're going to be echoing some of these philosophies in other areas, but when it feels good, you move toward it. Those validations that were not just going on at that time, but really had been the seeds for them had been planted since I was like probably as young as 7 or 8 years old in terms of like expectation for me to make it in some way, whether it was like in politics or later on, people thought more like sports and stuff. I, it was an expectation I felt that I very much internalized, and to feel like I had was meeting that again fed both forms of identity for me, the ones that others ascribed and the rewards for myself, the things that validated me personally.
So how did that lead you? Did that kind of, you mentioned planting the seeds here. Did that plant the seeds more so, or did those seeds start to sprout as you got more into your 20s, more into this career, and then the addiction may have started?
Those seeds that I mentioned most certainly were planted in early childhood through, you know, a variety
Absolutely.
of things. Just without going too far down a rabbit hole, basically, I've heard you speak with different people who work in education and child development and stuff, and so it's a topic you're familiar with, obviously.
Yeah. I think a better way to probably put it is, did those seeds get watered as you were in this phase of life, 22, 23, and then they start to sprout root?
That's a great way to say it, if that's what you mean. Yeah, that's absolutely what happened. That's absolutely what happened. And again, that happened earlier too. People kind of fed that for me throughout my teens and stuff through my participation in sports and also just like academic performance, things like that, and social, the way I showed up socially. Those things were kind of always validated for me. And it felt like that was where my
Definitely. You're fine.
So I had to find some creative ways around managing this addiction. Something that I often say to people is that more than the drug use, I think the secret is what quote unquote messed me up, which is if you've lived anything like that, I think it's relatable. Anybody who's had to live such a core part of their life in secret, I think will probably relate to that, because it was that addiction is a full-time job in itself. We all know how football coaches work. And then managing the secrecy around this addiction and trying to keep it compartmentalized from everybody in my professional life and my then wife was, I mean, it was extremely challenging, extremely stressful. I had so many, that's when I really started to develop even more anxiety, over which I had very little control. And I look back on it like, dude, obviously you weren't living authentically at all. I mean, you were pretending you were one person, and part of your life was totally different. And part of your life was being lived in a way that is really inconsistent with the values that, you were espoused. Um, and it's not tough for me to admit now. I got to take full ownership for that, obviously, but it was something that was tough to reconcile, because no one wants to. I don't think many people want to feel like that. Part of my compass is how are my actions aligned with my values? That is just such a huge part of what guides my thinking now. So it's hard for me to look back even, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, and see someone who didn't think that way or was able to live a life so inauthentically, when now radical transparency, as I call it, is such a core part of my identity and my personality. So yeah, in order to keep that secret, I had to do some, crazy stuff to manage my addiction through that. I got sleuthy on the internet. We'll leave that there. Um, I I'm huge into plants. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that shows up on my Instagram a little bit. I try not to overshare about it, but I love plants. I love pottery. So like, they go hand in hand. Those are talk about sober hobbies. Those are like things that I've just, really indulged. I loved in my life even before recovery. However, a complicating wrinkle in that is at one point I had the brilliant idea to begin growing poppies. And it's not funny, but that's what I do, is laugh at stuff that's funny.
It it's ironic. It's the irony behind it. Everything in hindsight, right? You're like, "Oh, man, you saying that is just like I'm hearing your story," and I'm like, when an addict grows his own supply.
You know what? And it's a really, I'm glad to have had that experience, because it's an interesting test case, because so many people whom I meet are under the false impression that if money were never a factor, supply was never a factor, if I didn't have to worry about that at all, then I could just keep this going my entire life. I'm living proof that that is not the case, or at least not for me, because I did have the access that I needed. And yet my mental health, my neurobiological health still deteriorated in a way that is consistent with long-term opioid use. And on top of that, on a psychological level, it reinforced many things about the addiction. It normalized it for me. It romanticized it for me, because it tied into something about which I already had passion. I'm sure there was a voice in my brain that was like, I'm not, look how smart I am. I can grow a plant and get what I need from it through a couple of processes. And, like, it really fed into a ugly part of me, really a part of which I'm not proud, but was definitely a part of what got me here.
Fatherhood kind of, or how did becoming a dad when your son was born, how did that change things? The you said you've been sober for 8 years. As far as I know, he's about that age, so 7. So those 2 timelines are pretty close to overlapping with your sobriety and getting clean and getting into now the field that you're working in now. So how did that really, I guess, change things or set you on the better path?
Yeah, it's huge. It is woven into that like a DNA strand, like a helix. I mean, there's no way to separate them. My ex-wife and I actually were trying for a couple years to get pregnant. She had some trouble with that. So we were living in Ohio I was coaching out there, and she was still coming back to Maryland, because she worked for Johns Hopkins, and, she was receiving like fertility treatment and stuff there. Long story short, she had an operation that after that we got pregnant within 3 weeks. So it just happened really fast. And, that's its own topic as far as people that trying to get pregnant and people who struggle with it. That is something that really educated me to a whole new world of pain that people go through, and was really tough for me to watch, even for my ex-wife. Like, yeah, it was tough to see. It was really, really hard for her. And but we get pregnant at this point. So here's the timeline. I'm in Ohio. I've reached the end. I've reached the point where my mental health has deteriorated so much I'm having serious panic attacks, crippling. That's the only way I can describe them, as panic attacks. And when I say that, it's not necessarily what people picture on TV, but it was absolutely arresting me and arresting my functionality. I began to use what's known as research chemical benzodiazepines, because you can get them legally for my anxiety, and again just escalated things to a really bad point. I made, and I hate saying this because this is literally something that against which I advise people probably 5 times a day, but I made the idiotic decision to try and detox myself at home, because that's where I was. I was not at the point where I could admit or accept help. I was still trying to, at that point, my ex-wife she knew the last 2 years of my active addiction, like about the opium and et cetera, but I still was able to keep it compartmentalized.
That's feel like that's pretty common for men, is it not? Like, when it comes to men and addiction, you're like, "I'll just do it myself. I'll do it myself. I'll detox myself. I'll do this myself. I don't need nobody. I don't want nobody. Like, I don't wanna accept it from anybody." Is that more common with men than women, you would say? Yeah, nodding your head
I
pretty hard.
mean, that's a great question to separate it, to think about it on a gender basis. I would say probably, and this is really speculative, and just based
Yeah.
on my experience, but I think probably women are often a little bit more open to treatment initially than men are. However, in my experience, especially around with opioids in particular, want almost everyone goes through several rounds of trying to do it themselves before they ever get formal treatment or help. And some people are literally are stuck in a perpetual cycle of convincing themselves that this is going to be how they're able to detox themselves. I have this tool now, whether it's a chemical tool or something, whatever, that's going to mitigate withdrawal. That's another huge illusion that I would like to disabuse people who like, don't necessarily come from a world of addiction. And that's that if I get through withdrawal, I'm using air quotes for anybody listening, if I get through withdrawal, I'm fine. I've made it. That is what stands between me and a new life and functionality. My inability to go through that torturous sickness that we all know of as opioid withdrawal. Well, hate to break it to people, but that is not the case. That is not where the work ends. That is very much where the work begins. And like I said, it just keeps people stuck in that cycle of trying to do it themselves. I was no different, and tried to detox myself at home. Long story short, I wake up in our bedroom. During the day, it's around noon, and I wake up to a bunch of paramedics around me, having had a grand mal seizure, which lasted a little over 5 minutes. And obviously, you're not aware after in a postictal state. Don't have a memory of it. If I do, actually remember talking to the paramedics, and because I was trying to convince them, guys, I did not just have a seizure. Trust me, like I'm sick and I'm just sitting here watching Breaking Bad and blah blah blah. But I did not. I can remember one of them saying to my ex-wife, like, are you sure? Because people don't usually talk like that right after they've come out of a seizure, which again, I think is probably just part of my years of practice,
Yeah.
faking.
Yeah. You're used to thinking in and putting up a story, and you had that ready, right? That was just your subconscious, right? That was your
It
reality
really is.
in your head.
Oh, and then I remember my ex-wife saying, Michael, look at our bed. We had all white bedding, and it was covered in blood, because I had bitten my cheek so severely. Um, and at that point I said, oh, okay. Yeah, guys, I guess I had a seizure. It was just really, I remember, so hard to understand and believe in that moment. But that was the impetus for me. That broke what I call like the bubble, which is a good thing. You know, that bubble, that insulation that we as addicts work so hard to maintain because we're protecting our addiction. And why do we do that? Because our addiction is what we become conditioned to believe as our main source of safety and security. So, like anything, we're going to take good care of that. And that my ex-wife wisely brought my mom, sister, and dad into the picture. My mom and sister are both friends, so you know they work in the medical field. And I'll never forget the next day, I I'm in Ohio. They're in Baltimore. My mom's in Colorado. And the next day, I opened my front door and they're on my porch. And I'm still trying to figure out what's going on. I'm like, oh, what are you guys doing here? And they're like, come with us. Just come back home for a little bit, you know? And I was like, I can't do that. And then I realized my wife has my stuff packed. My ex-wife has my things packed, ready to go. And I went back there and the next day, they had brought in an interventionist, like what I do some of now, who had investigated treatment options and everything for me. And I said yes. I went through 30 days of treatment fully, and I left there fully believing that I had solved my issue of dependence, that I was not an addict, quote unquote, an addict, that this was an issue of dependence, that I've had a monkey on my back for this many years, and now I'm liberated from it. And I say this like laughingly because of the obvious ignorance, you know, and because it's something I hear and see every day now, and for which I can't fault people because I had the same delusion. So I went several months of not doing anything in terms of self improvement or working any kind of program or anything. I started a business that was related to like medical referral, and that gave me, you know, a lot of access to doctors and prescribers. And long story short, I ended up using again. And as addiction does, part of addiction's nature is that it's progressive. And was a really good testament to that, in that it deteriorated much more quickly for me that time, which is something I'm grateful. That makes me grateful. My wife, during the portion in which I was sober, like, or, you know, clean, that's when she had the surgery and got pregnant. So I have this new business. I now have my first child on the way, and I think it's impossible, or it's, you know, it's ignorant not to recognize that those things played a role in bringing back some of those triggers that led to my addiction in the first place. Those things like what I call NGE messages, not good enough, inner critic messages, you know, not enough money, not enough, all these things, not enough. And mind you, I'm not working in football anymore. So we talked about identity starting out, huge change there for me. Again, that I just did not pay enough attention to. Through her pregnancy, I just remember getting I was so crazy with the working Jay. I was so insane. I mean, like, I was not coming home for nights, and not because I was having any other romantic entanglements. I was literally
Yeah.
just working. Obsessive became, I am obsessive compulsive. I do have obsessive compulsive disorder. So it really manifested itself there. And when the drugs became a factor, it just spiraled, you know. So toward the end of my ex-wife's pregnant, I knew I didn't want to be on anything, you know, when he was born. So I tried to get myself off of it. It's funny that people, in my experience, for me at least, don't realize the drug use is going on when you're on it. People noticed something was wrong when I was off of it. You know, that's when things became more apparent to them, because I wasn't myself. You know, I wasn't energetic and social and all these different things that the drugs allowed me, quote unquote, to be, you know, in a superficial way. So my son was born, and I, frankly, and this is a really hard thing to say without being, you know, becoming emotional. And that's that, you know, I was affected when he was born. I was both in withdrawal, and I was also taking Valium to try and like help with that. That's a wound, man. Like that's a really big wound that I've had to exercise. I've had to work on a lot and had to exercise a lot of grace toward myself, you know, and self-forgiveness. But it's one of the hardest things. It's been one of the hardest things to really accept and move on from.
Well, Mike, that will have to come in. I would love to hear more of that story and talk more about that. But I think the story that you shared today, not even think, I know the story that you shared today really highlights that recovery is possible, right? Through work, through hard work, determination, connection,
Sure.
love, and really just having the right motivation, realizing like I need help and accepting that help, that recovery is possible. And we'll have to follow this up in a part two because we didn't even get into the actual recovery journey and whatnot, but you're good, but we know it's possible, right? The story now, I mean, look at you now. Private practice, recovery, fatherhood, part two, a new life and new life over these last few years really got you to where you are now and to where you're going. So it's a great story to show. Like, look, Mike, you were in the thick of it, you were in the trenches, and that story is made up who you are and who you are today, and helped you become who you are. And so we'll have to finish this up in a part two, but I got to get the kids off to summer camp and things like that.
That's the,
Dad stuff. I got to go do dad
that's a
stuff.
great.
And I got to work and stuff today too, I guess. But Mike, thank you so much today for sharing part of your story. And we're gonna have to do this again to get the rest of it because I know the recovery journey, the comeback is always sweeter than the downfall. So we're gonna get to that recovery. We're gonna get to that second half. We're gonna get to that comeback because those comeback stories are where the inspiration lies. But I think for now, just people seeing you talk and hearing you talk about it and hearing the way you talk about it, the way that you've recovered, the way that you're open about it really shows a lot of recovery, self-work, self-love, and a lot of grace given towards yourself that you probably felt you didn't deserve and don't deserve on a regular basis. But grace is something that's freely given, even when we feel ourselves or the other person doesn't deserve it. And so with that, to our listeners, if you want to check out Mike and get to know him more, you can go and visit him on Instagram. His handle is it just at Curevine, Curvine? So at Curevine.
Curevine. Yep, Curevine. No punctuation or anything. That's my website as well. That's the name of the private practice.
Perfect. And we'll link that together. We'll throw this together and put that in the show notes for you guys to check out. So until next time, stay well, stay healthy, stay hydrated. Go ahead and go eat that barbecue. Go smell that fresh cut grass. Go hit a dad stance and admire your hard work. So until next time, we'll see you right here on the Young Dad Podcast.
Thanks so much, Jay. Looking forward